I will after the even I will register the vendor
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining session 2 of the Cybersecurity Talk series organized by ADL Connect. The purpose behind putting together this series of interactive and knowledgeable webinars is to enlighten you on the latest security trends in the world of digital transformation and how Axiata Digital Labs provides services that accelerate the global digital adoption of businesses around the world. For today's session, we've got two industry experts. First up, we have Mr. Ravindra Thalagahawatta, the Assistant General Manager, Global Cybersecurity Operations and ERM, who holds a Master's in Information Technology from the Manipal University in India, and also holds a Master's in Information Security at ACI University. And then we have Mr. Lahiru Hewawasam, who is a graduate of the University of Staffordshire with a bachelor's degree in Computer Networks and Security, as well as he has completed his MSc in IT specializing in cybersecurity. Lahiru also an active member of the AWS Community Builders Program and a Zero Trust advocate as well. So I would like to warmly welcome Ravindra and Lahiru, who will be focusing on the today's topic, cloud security and data privacy. Without further ado, let's dive into today's session. Over to you, Ravindra, as well as Lahiru.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, as you may aware, cloud computing has become a hot topic these days, and a lot of organizations are adopting cloud solutions or moving towards cloud-based solutions. So, therefore, we will be discussing about securing cloud environments and protecting sensitive data such as PII, financial data, and other categorized sensitive data in the cloud. So today we'll be covering risk and challenges associated with cloud security. Then best practices for cloud security, basically choosing the right cloud service provider according to your business model and compliance requirements. Then protecting data in the cloud, basically implementing encryption, identity and access management controls, data minimization, those things will be discussed. And emerging technologies and trends in the cloud security, mainly using like machine learning and artificial intelligence for threat detection and incident response. And then after that, zero trust model for cloud environment. So over to you, Lairo.
Thank you very much, Ravi. So I think you've managed to cover all the topics that we were going to talk about today. And yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Before starting, I would like to, sorry, if my slides are visible.
Yes, visible, Lairo.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ravi. All right, so let's get started. Now, let's jump into our first topic, which is understanding cloud security and data privacy. Now, when we talk about cloud security, now even before we jump into cloud security, let's get an understanding about cloud computing, because we still feel that in at least in the country, a lot of people might say that they know what cloud is and what cloud stands for, but let's get into a thorough understanding of cloud computing before jumping into what it is and how we can secure it. Right. So this is the definition that I pulled in from NIST. It's a quite old definition, but still it is relevant to date. So let's go through it. Now, it says cloud computing is a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to shared pool of configurable computing resources. Now, these okay, let's go through the entire definition. Basically, computing resources that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort or service provider interaction. Now, this is basically the principle of cloud, right? The keywords that I've highlighted are on demand, shared pool, rapidly provisioned, minimal management effort. right? So what do you mean by on demand? On demand is when you need to provision a service or maybe a node, the cloud provider will serve that for you. Shared pool, meaning that you are not the only, you're not the sole user of that physical hardware that is running the cloud services. So that is what we mean by shared pool. Rapidly provisioned, right? I'm sure some of you must have dabbled with a bit of cloud and, AWS, GCP, Azure, Huawei, all those sort of major cloud providers. Now, whenever you go and click on, if you want to start a service or you want to provision a VM or anything, whenever you click on the button start or initiate or whatever, right, it's almost instantaneous that you get the service. Right? This is what we mean by rapidly provisioned. And with minimal management effort is basically you as the customer will not need to do a lot of managing on part of the cloud environment. Neither will the cloud service provider itself. So when you when you instantiate a cloud service or a VM, that is when the automation and orchestration comes in and builds everything up for you. So now that we've gained an understanding of cloud computing, let's basically run through the risks and challenges associated with it. Now, even though we move our workloads to the cloud or we start using native cloud technologies, data breaches will still happen and will become a major part of your security journey, or maybe a major part of your security focus, right? So keep in mind that even though you move your data to an S3 bucket or maybe Azure Blob, it is not as safe as you think it is, right? You still need to take the necessary precautions in order to secure them, right? Insider threats will always be there. As long as there are employees, there will be insider threats, right? So anyone who has a malicious intent, an insider with a malicious intent, who will try to get access to these systems, cause a security breach or maybe in data leak. So anyone that falls into this category can be considered as insider threats. Lack of control. Now, this might not be a risk or a challenge, but a lot of organizations will feel a lack of control over their data once it is stored in the cloud, right? Uh, Especially when you're relying on public cloud providers such as AWS, GCP, Azure, because now you don't really have a good idea about where your data is. This is why a lot of organizations are a bit cautious about sending their data outside the country, and a lot of regulations have come in and put geo boundaries, like boundaries for your data to stay within, right? Next, we have compliance and legal risks. So a lot of things have changed in this region in terms of legal and regulatory compliance is coming in. So we have GDPR, we have PCI, we have HIPAA, we have a lot of other local regulations as well that govern what you can do with cloud and how you should secure your resources on the cloud, right? Next, last but not least, we have data loss and availability issues, right? Even though cloud providers advertise themselves as zero downtime or maybe even 100% uptime or whatever, right? They still can have severe outages. So you need to accept the fact that there will be outages, and you need to pay attention to what services you procure and how you can actually use some of the services that the cloud provider provides in order to reduce the risk of these basically the risk of this happening to you, and stop from that causing a significant business impact, right? Now, why would you think, okay, now let's say we've already had servers within our local data centers and we were okay with it, right? But since we wanted a lot of flexibility, we moved to the cloud and a lot of cost benefit came with that. But if we look at the components that we talked about, these were applicable to our local data centers as well, right? But since we moved to the cloud, a lot of customers, mostly a lot of customers, are under the impression that the cloud service provider will take care of all the data security, the hardening, and all those other stuff within the cloud resources as well. This is partly true and mostly wrong, right? Why I say that is because of the shared responsibility model, right? This is the shared responsibility model of, hold on, excuse me, this shared responsibility model of an infrastructure as a service model from AWS. So if you take a look at the the components highlighted in orange, right? This is the part that AWS takes care of. Right? So it takes care of the compute, the storage, the database, the networking that actually runs the cloud services. Mind you that this is not your cloud infrastructure. This is their cloud infrastructure, right? They will have the necessary global infrastructure set out for to setting up regions, the availability zones, the edge locations, and also they will maintain the software that provide the cloud the cloud services. However, now if you look at the blue side of things, the components that are highlighted in blue, now you will get to know that it is the customer's responsibility to maintain encryption, protection for network traffic, operating system level patches, hardening configuration, network and firewall configuration, right? Any platform or application that you deploy on the cloud is your responsibility. Identity and access management, even though they provide the services, it is still our responsibility to use it accordingly. And also, most importantly, the customer's data. Now, anything that you store on the cloud is your responsibility. And if a data breach were to happen due to your negligence or misconfigurations, it will be your responsibility at the end. Right? So it is important to get a thorough understanding about the shared responsibility model when you are adopting cloud platforms, right? This will be a bit different for SaaS, PaaS, and other applications or models, but it'll also provide it'll also go through the same shared responsibility model, right? Now, since we know that it's our responsibility to keep our data safe, let's take a look at some of the best practices that we can employ, right? Before we actually jump into the nitty-gritty best practices, we should pay attention to selecting the right cloud service provider. What I mean by this is basically before even selecting your cloud service provider. I mean, if you have already selected your cloud service provider, it's good. You're on the way. But if you're not, if you haven't, you might want to consider these 6 points, at least the 6 points, before you start your cloud journey, right? You need to first identify your business needs, right? This is so that you know what is required and what you need to look for, right? Next, you need to evaluate provider capabilities. Now, not all cloud service providers act the same or have the same services, right? They might have the same basic services, but when you move to advanced services that they provide, they might not be there in a specific region or the specific region that you want, or they might be not there completely, or they might be in preview. They might not be in general use. So you need to understand what you need first, and then you need to evaluate your cloud service provider in order to gain an understanding about if these requirements can be met by the provider that you're trying to select. Next, you need to question their security and compliance, right? Cloud service providers also have to go through, undergo certain compliance and regulations. So you need to pay attention to them when selecting your cloud service provider. Also consider the pricing and support plans. Pricing will play a major role in the selection of cloud or any product basically, but it's also important to consider support. Now, why I say this is, even though you select a very cheap vendor, you can come across a small issue or a major issue. And at that point, if you don't have the right type of support to back yourself up, or the cloud service provider doesn't provide the necessary support for you, then you're going to be in a lot of trouble in when you're trying to rectify this issue, right? Plan for data migration. Now, this is quite debatable because sometimes you might stay with one service provider. However, if you want to migrate, or if you want to move your data from an on-premise data platform, or like data on-premise cloud to your Azure, AWS, or GCP, you need to have the necessary tools, and the cloud service provider must support for this as well, right? You need to pay attention to that. Next is negotiating the contract terms. Now, it might not be very important for individual users, but for an organization or enterprise, this is crucial, because this is where your SLAs will come. This is where your payment terms will be discussed. This is where you can get good pricing for the services that you have. So you need to negotiate your terms and contracts, right? Now, once you do all this, then you are ready to make the purchase and come into the basis of cloud or cloud platforms, right? Number one, let's look at what we can do to secure our cloud environments, right? It's none other than with encryption and access control. Like I said, it is our responsibility to implement encryption and access control. So let's start with access control. Now, what I mean by access control is basically granting access on a need to know basis, right? Even though a user might ask for access to the HR system or HR database, they might not need all access, or complete access. So only grant access that they are required, or that is essential to perform their duties, right? Moving on, we have encryption. Encryption can be taken in, let's say, 3 categories. So we can talk about encryption at rest. Data encryption at rest, data encryption in motion, and data encryption in use. But encryption in rest and encryption in motion, or for data in motion, are the 2 main categories that we'll be talking about, or we'll be looking at in the cloud journey. Now, in order to perform these encryptions, the native cloud tools will provide, or native cloud services will provide native tools to implement these controls. Now, when you're trying to configure these, the first thing that you will come up and ask is, what do you do about key management? How do you manage your keys? Now, it's quite simple. In my opinion, there are 3 main categories that you can categorize these keys under. There are customer managed keys, platform managed keys, and platform owned keys. Now, the terms and descriptions might change from cloud service provider to cloud service provider. So I would recommend that you go and understand what each of these mean in the context of the specific cloud service provider. So customer managed keys is basically any key that we bring in to the environment. Platform managed keys is basically any key that is only managed by the platform. And platform owned keys is basically any key that is created and managed by the platform or the service provider itself. Now, trying to understand how you can actually incorporate all this together is by adhering to your strictest compliance, right? Or your regulatory body, right? So no matter how much effort you put in, your governing body will decide if it's adequate or not, right? Now, it is recommended that you follow your compliances to a T, so that you don't actually have to pay any, I don't know, like fines or anything like that. So when you're configuring access control and encryption, please make sure that you have everything set up according to your compliance or regulatory body. Now, in order to impart this knowledge, we need to set up training and awareness for all our staff and our users, right? We've seen a lot of cloud engineers and cloud specialists knowing about all this, but then the employees that work there will do it their own way. Now, this, in order to stop this or to empower the employees themselves, in order to like follow best practices, training and awareness plays a major role in anything, right? Next, we have security audits and risk assessments. Now, these are quite important because these are the same security audits that we've done for our on-premise data centers, for our organizations, right? So the same must be done for our cloud infrastructure. So the security audits that we conduct will identify gaps and weaknesses in the current security infrastructure and also provide recommendations for improvement. So this is quite important when you're covering areas such as network security, access control, data protection, and also incident response. Now, physical security in the sense of a cloud environment might be a bit tricky because you don't have access to the physical data centers, but there are times where you can actually request a physical visit to the data center if you know, the cloud service provider agrees to it. And in cloud environments, the most commonly focused areas of audit are security controls, user access controls, data encryption, and compliance with industry regulations. So let's say if your organization is ISO certified, then you might have to conduct an ISO related audit for the cloud environment. Say your organization is PCI DSS certified, you might have to conduct an audit according to the PCI regulation or compliance. Next, we have risk assessments. Now, these are some of the most crucial assessments that you can do in order to gain an idea about the potential threats and the likelihood and the impacts of these threats. Right? These are especially important when you're considering the cloud environment because it's accessible globally and you have a lot of edge nodes exposed. You have a lot of underlying technology that you're not very familiar with. So this is quite important. This will help develop strategies to mitigate risks and enhance security postures, and also again, comply with regulatory requirements. Now, risk assessments specific to cloud environments would include data breach assessments, unauthorized access, and vulnerabilities in the cloud provider infrastructure. Now, the latter, the vulnerabilities in the cloud service infrastructure is a bit tricky to get around because it is managed by the cloud service provider, but they do release the advisories from time to time. So just make sure that you're kept up to date with them. Now, let's look at protecting our data in the cloud. What do we do, right? While you're moving in your data to the cloud, you can definitely take a look at the compliance regulations that the cloud service provider has. Now, I've pulled this up from AWS and they are compliant to GDPR, HIPAA, NIST, PCI DSS, SOC compliance, FIPS, and CSA. Now, keep in mind that all these regulations might not be applicable to all services and regions. Now, these two keywords are very important when you're talking about service in the cloud, right? Because AWS itself has about I think it's more than 300 services, and it has multiple regions. Not all regions are the same. Not all services act the same. So you need to understand what these regulations cover and if your service is actually covered by them, right? So if you take the EC2 instance or maybe even the DynamoDB instance, so you need to understand if these services are covered by these regulations and also the region that you run them on. So that's very important. Next, this is something that we can do, right? Data classification. We've been doing it for the longest time, right? But we still can't get it right. That is how it is. Now, data classification is basically categorizing your data according to its sensitivity, right? I've listed three commonly used categorizations or labels, as we call them. So confidential, restricted, and public. So each of these have a separate sensitivity attached to them. Once you attach these labels to data, then we can actually apply the technical controls in order to secure these data. Now, I'll explain how machine learning comes into the picture and how it will help you do this, at least on AWS. But let's go with the flow for now. Next, we have data minimization. Now, data minimization might sound like a very complicated topic, or might sound very complicated, but it is basically collecting the data that you need and what is necessary, and nothing more than that, right? So basically, you identify the data that is necessary for the specific job that you're trying to do, then limit the collection of data to only that specific data that you require, and implementing the controls to ensure that the data is not used for any other purpose. So basically collecting what you need and using the data for what you are actually planning for, right? And after that, after what you're done, basically after you're done with your data, you need to use proper data destruction methods to remove this data or delete this data. Now, since it's our responsibility to look at cloud security, it'll also be our responsibility for responding to incidents, right? So this is your basic incident management process or cycle, and the same will apply to the cloud. You need to have basically, like, first stage is preparation. So you need to have your response guides planned out. You have to have your technical controls in place. You have to have your playbooks in place, all that in place to give your SOC analysts or security personnel to actually conduct the investigation during an incident response. Next, we have detection and analysis. Now, since you're on the cloud, you'll have a lot of native cloud technology that you can use. So a good example of this is Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon, I think the one is CloudWatch, we have Cloud Logs. So all that. So you can use these native technologies to your benefit. So it's Security Hub that consolidates everything on AWS. So likewise, and Azure, you have Sentinel, GCP, you have, I think, Commander, can't remember. But these are the technologies that you can use, or you're free to use third-party applications that are actually specific to these requirements. Next, we have containment and eradication. Now, this is a bit tricky because you can't really pull a plug on the cloud environment. Obviously, you can, but not a physical plug. So in these cases, you need to rely on the technical controls that you've placed before in helping with your isolation. So you can use security groups, you can use network ACLs, you can use gateways to actually segregate your network into small parts so that it's easier to be separated during an incident. Next, you have recovery. So this talks about the backups, the snapshots that you've taken, the templates that you have in order to restore operation. You have post-mortem, or some would say lessons learned in this case. So it's basically writing down what you did, what happened, and making sure that this doesn't happen again. It's very important. Otherwise, you'll be doing the same mistakes all over again, and that is not productive at all. So you need to pay attention to what you do and to improve your security posture after you're done with the incident response. Next, let's look at recovery plans. So before even talking about recovery plans, or before even implementing recovery plan, you need to conduct a business impact analysis to determine the RPOs and RTOs of your business. Now, once you define the RPOs and RTOs, this is where you can look at backup and recovery. So you need to have regular backups running, or taking regular backups. And it's not enough to actually take regular backups, but you also need to test them out. Now, what will happen if the backup is not restorable during an incident? You might not be able to recover that data. So you need to test the backups and check if they are recoverable, right? And to have alternate sites and services, you need to have BCP planning. Even though you're on the cloud, you need to have BCP planning. You need to have availability sets, availability zones configured. So all those sort of things. And also, last but not least, communication and training for employees, customers, and vendors. Very important, because you might have all the necessary tools, technologies in place, but if no one knows how to use them or to actually put them into action, then what is the use of having all these, right? Always educate your staff, not only the IT staff, have a backup, right? Have your cloud team look into these DR plans, BCP plans, get the acknowledgement from for these services. Check if these controls are done or made properly. A good way of doing this is by using CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management, or maybe even another tool that consolidates the hardening of these or configuration of these cloud assets, right? So use these tools. Always try to automate where possible, right? Now, let's look at the emerging technologies and trends in cloud security. First of all, machine learning and artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence has been uh, thrown around a lot lately with the introduction of ChatGPT and what it can do. But this is more specific to threat detection, right? So artificial intelligence and machine learning in particular, has been predominant in this area for behavioral analysis, network traffic analysis, malware detection, and also threat intelligence. Now, these two logos that I have here might not be clear for anyone who hasn't used AWS before, but the one on the left with the squiggly lines is Amazon Macie. Right, for anyone who is actually interested, you can read up about Amazon Macie. It's a wonderful tool that actually looks at data classification on your S3 buckets. Right, that is something that we didn't have a while ago, and now it actually uses machine learning to help with data discovery and classification. So how cool is that, right? Now you don't have to have predefined rules. You can have machine learning data sets coming in and helping you identify data more effectively and more accurately. Next, on towards the right side, uh, with the shape of a gear, is Amazon Guard Duty. Now, Amazon Guard Duty has been there for quite some time, and it has gone through a lot of iterations. It too uses machine learning to detect anomalies with access logs, DNS, and network logs from your VPCs, your cloud, basically your IAMs and all that, to actually detect anomalies and threats that are happening within your AWS account. Now, in terms of threat detection, these two, basically Amazon Guard Duty, is a native tool that you can utilize to monitor your AWS platform. So this is what I've been saying, there are native tools that use these modern technologies within the cloud service provider itself. However, there can be specific technologies that are designed to do this from third parties. Now it's up to you to decide what tools to go to, or what if you want to use a third-party tool or your AWS or Amazon native services. But what I would recommend is using them to its fullest potential, and then seeing if you need a third-party tool to come in and complement them. Because Amazon Guard Duty. Now, if you take a network, or like if you take enterprise, for example, you might have a lot of accounts running in this enterprise. So Amazon Guard Duty is able to actually you can actually enable Amazon Guard Duty in the specific region and the specific account that you need to, and then basically daisy chain those accounts into a say consolidated monitoring account, so that you can transfer all the findings into one single account. That will make it easy for monitoring. So that those are things that you can do with the native tools. But again, there are specific tools that you can do use. And I think for basically, like, if you want to get to know a lot of tools that are out there, you can go to the marketplaces of these cloud service providers and then check them out. Now, last but not least, the zero trust model. I think we have also done, I think about 1 or 2 sessions regarding the zero trust security model and specifically about implementing the zero trust security model, its maturity models, and all those other very interesting stuff. But I will try to take a quick overview into the zero trust security model and why it is actually necessary. Right. So traditional security models, if you talk about traditional security models, we have focused on implementing a firewall and then keeping our perimeter safe, right? But with the cloud coming in and where your remote workforce comes in, your vendors, your third-party service providers and all that, now where do you draw your perimeter? Now your perimeter is not very clear in these enterprises, right? So this is where a zero trust security model is perfect because it doesn't really focus on the network that these users are connected to actually grant access, but it actually considers the risk that they pose, right? So the zero trust security model can be split into 6 or 7 pillars, considering what you think about. So first we have identity, device, network, application or workload. We have data. Next, we have visibility and analytics. We have automation and orchestration. And at the bottom, we have governance, right? We need a good governance framework to actually support all our technical controls. So that is why they've included the governance into the picture. So basically, the security model talks about securing these individual pillars, the basic identity, device, network, application, and data, the 5 pillars individually. And on top of that, provide visibility and analytics, also automation and orchestration, in order to provide a very comprehensive security model. This is not about securing your perimeter. This is not about securing your identity or account. This is about securing your entire enterprise, your basic infrastructure, your identities, everything that runs on top of it and underneath it. So that is what we have for you today. So let's talk about the key takeaways, right? Always talk about or always think about the shared responsibility model when you're migrating to the cloud, or if you're still using the cloud, right? Always implement security best practices. Like I would say, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't try to come up with security best practices for yourself. I mean, you can have specific niche requirements, then it is okay. But for the majority of the implementations that we have, the security best practices out there are more than enough, right? So if you consider AWS, you have your AWS well-structured. I can't remember. I think it's well-structured in architecture or something like that. So you can use that as well. So I'll get the name right now. Next, be mindful of regulations, right? So what? It's actually well architected framework. Sorry about that. So you can use those to actually get the best practices into your implementation. Now, regulation, moving to the third point. You have to be very mindful of the regulations. Now, regulations such as GDPR and HIPAA, they're very strict about what you do and where you store your data. So you please be mindful of where you store your data and how you secure this data. Because if you are caught not compliant, or maybe if you undergo breach, you might have severe repercussions, right? Always adopt and utilize native cloud security technologies. This is what I've been going on with Amazon Guard Duty and Amazon Macy. So there are other technologies that you can use. So please use them because they are a native offering from the cloud service provider, and then they mix and match well together as well. Also, incorporate emerging technologies upon evaluation. Now, why I say upon evaluation is when you're working for an enterprise, not all emerging technologies may be good, and not all emerging technologies may be tried and tested. But don't be late to the party. Incorporate and try to utilize as much as possible, because the newer the technology, the newer the threat that comes in, and if you're using the right type of technology, you might be safe with them. Right. So with that, I would like to say thank you. And if we have any questions, I would be happy to answer them. I think Ravi would also be happy to answer them. I think we have another 10 or 12 minutes remaining. Okay. If you have any questions, you can drop it in the chat, or I think we have a Q&A section. So just reminding everyone that we do have a Q&A section available. We'll wait until 3:50 and then we'll see if anyone has any questions. If not, we can spare everyone, and I don't know, the 10 minutes from the hour. Okay, I think we have one question from Aisha. If we hope to learn cloud, which one can we use to start with? Is it AWS, Azure? What has good learning materials? Now, it's debatable, right? It's debatable about what you want to achieve. Obviously, I would recommend AWS because AWS has a very structured learning approach, if I would say. You have a lot of courses available for AWS and a lot of services available. So AWS would be a good starting point. And considering the adoption of AWS amongst enterprises, I think AWS would be a good start because I think it's about 60%. It holds about 60% market at the moment. I think something around that. So AWS would be a good starting point. And a good starting point for learning is basically a cloud academy or maybe even LinkedIn Learning. So either one of those two would be good. And AWS actually has its own learning path, or maybe gamification learning learning path. Let me just see if I can drop this. There we go. So you have AWS Cloud Quest. Let me just put that in. AWS Cloud Quest. And as for the free learning, they have been giving out badges. So AWS serverless badge. Let me just see if they have this. All right, it's from AWS Skill Builder. So you can use AWS Skill Builder also to learn about cloud and all that. And recently they've been giving out badges that you can actually, use. So this is another link that you can use. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. If not, just let me know. Thank you. And Ravi, if you have anything to add to that, I'm sorry, I'm hogging all the questions.
I think Lahiru, IBM also has come up with some learning paths for cloud and other cloud, and again securing cloud environments, and there are so many other things which are like free.
Yes. I also see that. Yes, Ravi. So it's actually, I think it's this one. It's for anyone who is actually interested.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Any other questions? Questions are always welcome. That's how we learn. Okay. I don't think we have other questions coming in.
Yeah.
So just if someone is there from our Radio Connect team, maybe they can wind things up.
So, okay, Lahiru and Ravindra, let's wrap up today's session then. So thank you so much for taking the time to carry out today's session. And thank you to everyone that joined. See you again at the next session of the cybersecurity series by the ADL Connect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a nice day.